speaking of our next speaker, we have William Jacobson. He is an attorney at the Cornell Law School and the founder of Legal Insurrection Foundation. And he's going to talk about the media and what they're doing as it talks about pushing some of these narratives out there and what we can do to combat that. Will? Bill and Bill, thank you.
Can everybody hear me? Good. Now the microphone's on. Thank you for that. And Wilfred's a very hard act to follow. He covered so many points that got me rethinking what I'm going to talk about today. I want to thank Ashley and Jean for putting this all together and the others at Parents Unite. It's really great to meet a lot of people who are part of a really great movement, a movement I consider one to save not only our children but our country. What we are seeing happen in the schools, and it's been a generation in coming, is a movement to really tear down our society, to set people against each other, and race is the mechanism that is being used. It is the tool to split people apart. It's really great to see so many of the people that at Legal Insurrection and criticalrace.org that we've worked with, have either been on our panels or we've interacted with, including Wilfred and Ian and Paul and Erica and Kenny and so many different people here. And going through the list of the very impressive list of speakers, I was really taken by how broad-based this movement is that we have and how young it is. I looked through the list and I got a little panicked because I realized I think I'm the oldest speaker here today. But that's good. We need younger people. And it really is a younger person's, and I don't mean 18-year-old, but younger person's movement. It's a parents' movement. It's a movement of parents who really became awakened, not awakened to something that has been happening for a generation. I think the trajectory that I had is very reflective of what has gone wrong in the education system. So I graduated Harvard Law School in 1984. My classmate practically invented all this nonsense, Kimberly Crenshaw. And the themes that were being pushed back then are the themes that we're seeing now, but there's one difference. All of the activists, they didn't call it critical race theory. Back then it was critical legal theory. All of those activist students went into academia. And they very smartly identified the way to undermine our society. And it's to get other people's children and in a sense turn them into your own ideologically. And that's what they've been doing for 35 years. But that's not a natural situation. And as people are waking up to that, you have parents coming through and objecting to it. So just a short brief about myself. So most of my career, I was an attorney, joined Cornell Law School in 2007, and formed Legal Insurrection website in 2008. Reality is, they never would have hired me if I had that website beforehand. I think Wilfred might have made some allusion to it, but the stats that I've seen, if you go back 20, 25 years, not that long ago, the split between professors who self-identified as liberal or self-identified as conservative/moderate was only about 60-40. So yes, it leaned liberal, but it was not completely out of whack. If you take that same survey now, you find it something like 28-1. And if you look at the youngest cohort of hires at the university level, people who are maybe not yet tenured, who have only been there 5 to 10 years, it's something like 40-1 in terms of self-identification. So at least that's higher education. And of course, higher education ultimately feeds K through 12. So we formed Legal Insurrection. We rolled out last February, criticalrace.org, which is a website devoted, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, devoted to documenting initially the spread of critical race training. So we have a little bit broader scope than the theory of critical race theory throughout higher education. We now have over 400 colleges and universities documented. We have an interactive database, and we're increasingly focused on K through 12 because when we rolled that out, and we got 1 million views in one day when we rolled that website out, the biggest question we got from our tip line was, when are you going to do K through 12? K through 12 is really where the battle is now. Higher ed is more or less lost. We are trying to save the survivors. Okay, in higher ed, the leftists are scouring the landscape for survivors, and that's why you hear about cancel culture. Cancel culture is an attempt to remove the few stragglers of moderation and true liberalism in higher ed. But K through 12 is really where the fight is now. That's the future, and we're becoming more involved in that. That's why I'm so thrilled that I was able to speak here today. So the topic of my speech is how to frame the media narrative and moving to action. Framing the narrative, I think at this stage, is really counter-framing the narrative, because we are up against an extremely organized and well-funded movement to push euphemistically called diversity, equity, and inclusion, and race-based teaching throughout education. And when I say counter-messaging, because look at how good they are. Look at the terms they come up with. Anti-racism. I mean, that is, in my mind, the greatest linguistic sleight of hand that we have seen in our lifetime. Because as we all know, when you get into it, what they call anti-racism is not against racism, it actually is furthering racism. Yet they have staked out the territory. Go to any university and probably any high school in America now, and they talk about anti-racist training. They talk about, so if you're opposed that, they have now defined you as racist. So they look at how good they are at messaging. And the person who perpetrated that linguistic sleight of hand more than anyone just received, I think it's the MacArthur Genius Prize, another $600,000 in his pocket. And he gets $15,000 to appear before a school committee virtually. So look at how good they are at framing those issues. Equity. Well, who could be against equity? And they pick a word that I guarantee you 98% of the US population thinks it means equality. It's so similar. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so they are extremely good at that messaging. They have created a landscape before we ever got into this that we now have to deal with. I bet you almost everyone here has come up against a certain framing of the issues that the other side has established. They talk about truth in the classrooms. All they want to do is teach the truth in the classrooms. And they want us to trust students. We hear that all the time. Why don't you trust the students to receive this information? And this is all the result of these nefarious, dark money, right-wing groups. This isn't an actual parents' movement. We hear that all the time. And that educators only want to teach the truth. And really what we want, they claim, is we want to ban discussion about racism. We don't want to teach about slavery. We don't want to teach about Jim Crow. That's what they say. Of course, none of that's true. And these are the messages they push out all the time. But you need to understand that this is not happenstance. Most people don't understand how organized and how moneyed the groups pushing this are. Hopefully my slide will work. Okay, so in part of the research that we've been doing, we came across this group called the Future of Learning. They actually have a messaging guide that gets distributed. And who is Future of Learning? It's not a nothing group. It is a coalition of over 300 groups and major foundations funding them. And they coordinate. Guess who is among their funders? National Education Association. Every time you dig into things, you find National Education Association, to a lesser extent, American Federation of Teachers, but it's really NEA that is behind a lot of what is happening in the schools, and they are the funders, among the funders of this group. They also have 2 people on the steering committee of this group. And here are their top 5 messages in their messaging guide. Every one that I just read to you. This is the messaging guide that they put out. We have it posted on our website. We wrote a lengthy article about it, about what we found about these groups. They also have outside consultants who help them design their messaging. So this is highly organized. Every time they accuse you of being, just a tool of some big Koch brothers scheme, they really are the ones who are the AstroTurf. And so they've hired, and this is part of referenced in their messaging guide, outside strategic consultants to tell them what messages they should use and how they think they should approach it. And these are actually really good advice. You should write these down, okay? Seize the moral high ground. Ascribe motivations to the opposition. Don't volunteer the term critical race theory. They know that that term has become toxic, so they play games. 1, they don't use it. And 2, they say, oh, that's just a narrow legal academic theory, which I think Wilfred addressed. That's not the case. And when asked about it, define it on their terms as just honesty. So the point of this is that we are up against a very organized, very well-funded groups who want to reframe the issue. And they want to reframe the issue away from patriotism. They want to reframe it away from colorblindness and race neutrality and American exceptionalism and individualism and capitalism. In other words, they are against every single thing this country has stood for centuries. And they want to reframe it as to collective responsibility, diversity, empathy, belonging, pragmatism, ingenuity. So they want to reframe everything. They are already doing that. They love culturally responsive education. This is from their messaging guide. This is what they say. These words are from their messaging guide, that it's worth fighting for. And they have literally talking points that they want people to use to push culturally responsive education. So they play all these word games. Question is, how can we reframe the narrative? And the media, to me, is key to it. It's not the only aspect of it, but the media is key. And there are several different aspects of the media. There's the easy part, which I will loosely call conservative media. I would put legal insurrection in that. We have been very successful at bringing stories forward that we're able to push nationally. You may have heard of Rhode Island. We're based in Rhode Island, so we brought a Rhode Island mother forward on our website, Nicole Solis. We brought a Rhode Island middle school teacher forward, Ramona Bessinger, and they've gotten national exposure, and hopefully we'll have more. And so conservative media is willing to publish these things. You have social media, Facebook groups, if you can keep them alive and not have Facebook shut you down. And then there are old school listservs, gather names of people, and this is all local stuff that you have to do locally. And then there's the mainstream media, and I put those into 2 categories, which is local, where you have some percentage of getting a fair shot, and national, where you have 0% of getting a fair shot. One thing that's really important as activists, as parents, is to develop relationships with reporters, particularly local reporters. Make their life easy for them. This is general media advice. Reporters nowadays are extremely underfunded. Newsrooms have been cut back drastically. If you can hand them a story on a silver platter, you can write it up for them, okay? They may not take it verbatim, but you're saving them work. If you can give them documents, if you can give them interviews, whatever you can give local media and conservative media. You can try large mainstream media, but they will twist it, I guarantee you. You can give them scoops if something big is going to happen. Let them know in advance. Let them be the one to break the story. Prepare a short statement for them that you can give to them in advance, because they need to quote somebody in their article. And if you can save them a phone call, you've saved them work, and you have made it more likely they will cover your issue. And of course, you want, by giving them a short statement, keep it short, okay? I know you want to educate people. You want to tell every last detail and nuance. Keep it to 1 or 2 sentences, okay? Because that's what they need. They probably have an 800-word limit in their story, and you're making their life easier if you give them 20 words that they can just quote from you and plug right into their story. Try to have your interviews with them by email. So they give you a written question and you give them a precise written answer, because that way you don't need to worry about them misquoting you. They could be misquoting you because people make mistakes, or they could be misquoting you deliberately. Record your interviews, assuming it's legal in the state you're in, or if it's not legal to record it on your own, tell them you're recording it so you have their consent. Reporters, this is a big scoop for you, very frequently record everything on their phone, whether they tell you or not. So most of them will not be offended if you say, I'd like to record this interview. And that's really good, because you don't want to be misquoted. When you give them answers in writing, keep it super short, because if you give them something short, it is harder for them to cherry pick sections of what you've given them and then perhaps portray what you said inaccurately. So keep it very soundbite-ish. Make believe it's Twitter, and you have, I think we're up to 280 characters. It used to be 140, but keep it really succinct, sound bites. What do you want to be quoted on in the newspaper or on a website? And that's what you want to give them. But also focus on the message. What is the message? Think this through that you're trying to push. You are for equality. Equality is our higher standard as Americans. You are for non-discrimination. You oppose, and the word that I like to use is the racialization of education. Because by using that term and focusing on the fact that they are focused obsessively on race, that they are pitting students against each other, pitting parents against each other, you are really focusing on what you want to happen. Don't get involved in their word games over, is this CRT, is it not? I mean, there are many good things. If they're teaching students that their destiny is based on the color of their skin, that they should view classmates based on the color of their skin, etc. They are teaching the principles of critical race theory. You will never find a 5th grade book called Critical Race Theory. That's not how it happens. And then the last is moving to action, and I'm going to draw on a few of the things that I witnessed since we started in 2008. We were very much observant and to some extent participants in the Tea Party movement, and there are a lot of lessons there. One is that no one person or group can do everything. So find what you're good at, whether it's as a group or as an individual, and use that to your advantage. But what's most important is that everybody do something. Whatever it could be a letter to the editor. It could be going to a school board meeting. It could be running for school board. Whatever it is, it could be getting parents together. Whatever it is, it's all hands on deck. Find your strength, find what you are good at. I would also caution you to be very careful. What used to happen with the Tea Party movement is that left-wing websites would send people to rallies, and you could have 1,000 people with 500 signs, and they would find the one person with the crazy sign dressed crazy, okay? And sometimes they sent those people to them. We were able to document back in 2009, 2010, that various left-wing groups would send people to Tea Party rallies, would shout racist things. There were plants, and then they would, of course, have a videographer there. Look at who's at this rally. So you have to self-police. If you have a Facebook group and you see somebody talking trash and talking nonsense, kick them out, okay? Because there's a better than 50% chance that they are a plant there, because that way they can go and they can screenshot your Facebook group, and then they use that against you. So you also have to self-police. In terms of us, and I don't know how much time I have left, but our strength is research. There are many people who do things that wouldn't just fit our personality. We're, not really an entity that's equipped to deal with lawsuits, for example. We do have lawyers on staff, but we're not a public interest law firm. We can't bring lawsuits. We can connect people to people who bring lawsuits, but that's not our strength, so we're not going to try to be something that we're not. We also are not really equipped to deal with a lot of the sort of leaks of documents that other individuals and groups have been very successful at getting media attention on and highlighting the issue here. And I know that, Parents Defending Education and Erica Sanzi, who's here, they've been really good at getting those sort of leaks. And obviously Chris Rufo, and there are other national personalities. But that's not us. That's not our personality. That's not what we would be good at. So we don't try to do that. What we are good at is deep research, and we have done that at Legal Insurrection through the website criticalrace.org. We've created an interactive map, which you can click on your state, and then you have a drop-down menu of the schools we've covered. We haven't covered every, but we're up over 400 now, and we have researchers who gather up publicly available information about what's happening in higher ed. We don't have a map yet for K through 12, but we do have a lot of resources for K through 12 on the website, and I'm just going to tease you a little bit. Watch the news on Tuesday. We're rolling out a new feature on this website that I think will get a lot of media attention. And so that's what we do. We have found our place in this movement and in this world, which is being research-oriented. We've been around for 13 years. God willing, we'll be around another 13 years. We're here for the long haul. Kimberly Kay, who is our operations manager, was manning our table with her daughter outside, and she's here today. So we really have found our place in the movement. Find your place in the movement and do something, whatever it happens to be. And I will stop there and see if we have any questions.
Thank you, Bill. Let's see if anything comes up. I got to ask you a question, though, before you go.
Okay.
I like the part that you mentioned about the CRT. I think is important, both because we can't solve this from a political standpoint, but also that they're kind of tricky in their wording, so they don't call it. So whatever Rufo and the others are doing to kind of fight back against that in legislators, it can help a little bit. But part of it is they'll just say, where are we saying that, right? Which is why I write a lot still about the 1619 Project, because everybody saw this accelerate after George Floyd died, but at that point, 1619 was already in 4,500 schools. So, you talk about the media. How can we get the media to frame, our approach and the problems that we have without putting that label on it? So, how would you label it then?
Yeah,
if you don't label it CRT.
I agree. The labeling it as critical race theory, I think, is accurate, but it has enabled the other side to engage in a extended argument. If you recall from the Clinton days, of what what the meaning of is, okay? So what is the meaning of critical race theory? And that's why I prefer the term racialization of education, because that's what it is, okay? They are focusing children on elevating race to the single determinative factor in their lives, and that pits children against each other, against their parents, against their school, against their society. So, but it's tough because, yes, I do believe critical race theory was accurate. You need a term to refer to things, and the fact that they are running so furiously away from that term, I think, is a reflection of that they understand. If people understood what was going on, there would be an absolute revolution in this country. And that's why you're seeing them trying to demonize these parents the way they demonized the Tea Party. It was the same thing in 2009. The Tea Party was behind every perceived crime that took place in the country. And that's why the school boards are now want this whole movement declared to be domestic terrorism.
Well, we have a couple questions here, but I want people to understand that that's important, because what we end up doing is having this argument back and forth about CRT at the top, and it's this, it's not this, and no one ever talks about what the issue is because they're talking about CRT. So Terry has a question. She wants to know, what about non-mainstream media like podcasts and Breaking Points and stuff, and she mentions a couple of the big ones.
Absolutely, and I think that's something that I probably should have included, that there is an entire world out there that did not exist 5 years ago for practical purposes, which is podcasts, which is alternative media, which are Telegram groups. There are a whole lot of things out there. I would say get your message out, much like you should do whatever you are good at. Get your message out however you can. But the reality is that, as you know, millions and millions of people still watch the CBS News at night. It's unfathomable, the half hour where they spend 20 seconds on a topic. But that's how most people in the country still get their news. They still get it from AP articles that are reprinted in 1,000 newspapers across the country because it's easy. They don't have the reporters to do it themselves. So as much as detestable as the mainstream media has become, it is still something you've got to deal with.
Right. And, you know, we have a little time. You got a couple other questions, but I want to say another thing that's important about that. I talked constantly on my radio show, and I talked to Erica earlier about this. And you talk about the mainstream media still having a pull, but it's beyond that. People are shocked by how many people still don't know that this is going on. I used to call it the Keeping Up with the Kardashian syndrome. I guess it's a different show now. I guess it'll be Housewives or something. But the average person has a life. They have kids. They have things they have to focus on, their jobs and all the COVID. So they're not focused on this, and they're shocked. You would be shocked. Those of us who are in this every day and paying attention to this and tweeting about it and doing shows will be shocked by how the average people just literally don't know this is going on at all. Like I talked to my brother about something, and he's like, what, they're doing what in schools? No idea. Now, he has grown kids, but that's the largest segment of the country. So we are talking to ourselves and maybe, you know, gaining ground every day, but we have to somehow reach this 200 million people who are blind to this. And, you know, we have to find some others. They mentioned some things like Rogan and Dark Horse. Somehow they forgot about Cut the Bull, but that's cool. Another question is from William H. on the live stream. Hello, William. He wants to know, do you think that most educators in K through 12, are they promoting DEI, and if they are, do they understand its Marxist foundations?
I think most of them, you know, people do what they're required to do to keep their jobs. Yeah, and if your school district is requiring you to teach something, you're going to teach it. But we have also seen many examples, including the town in which legal insurrection is founded, Barrington, Rhode Island, uncovered by parents defending education, of teachers who go rogue, teachers who go above and beyond, teachers who get their students to participate in political type of activity with regard to the subject matter. I was watching, there was a bill pending in Rhode Island, introduced in Rhode Island, to quote unquote ban certain concepts being taught. Now I'm against that sort of thing, and I think it was a poorly crafted bill, although I think the intentions were good behind it. And so they had an assembly hearing, live, virtual, where people could call in and give comments. And I started to notice so many of the comments were coming from high school kids, and they were coming from high school kids in our town. And I'm saying, that's really odd. And then there was a high school teacher who commented. And then Parents Defending Education served a public records request, which is a great tool, and uncovered that the students were actually getting extra course credit for participating in this. Of course, the school said, well, we didn't tell them what to say. Well, your teacher has an opinion, and you're all calling in expressing the same opinion. So there are a lot of teachers who go rogue on this. That's not part of the curriculum at Barrington High School, but it's something that teachers did. So teachers are, the bulk of them are reacting to what there is required of them, but there are many who view activism as an integral part of what they do.
And Lucy Veltri wants to know, do you publish a ranked list of colleges and how infiltrated they are to CRT?
We don't. We didn't do the listicle because it's fairly hard to do that, because so much of what happens never has the name critical race theory on it. We are thinking about it, that we don't have 10 worst. I know that would be very good for internet traffic. People love 10 worst, okay? Or 10 best.
Right.
And we haven't gone to that yet. Our database is neutral. We gather the resources, and that's why in any given day, and Kimberly can attest to this because she checks the inbox, in any given day, we have people who scream at us that we are racist because we're against critical race theory, or we are racist because we're promoting it. So in the same day, we get one that says, why are you promoting this? And the other says, why are you against it? And that's the power of that website and the power of our database. It is just the data. We go and we mine what the schools are telling themselves, because they love to brag about this stuff. There's no lack of information. It's not the same in K through 12. At the university level, the schools love to brag about what they're doing. So we just go out and we document it, and we link it, and we archive it in case they remove it. And so we have a neutral database, so we've decided not to rank.
Okay. And Charles Garnett wants to know, he says at the start of your talk, you talked about these large number of funded organizations. And he basically wants to know, are they disparate and fragmented, or are they really, some unifying force at the top that's
Well,
guiding them?
this Future of Learning is the coalition. That is one of, and it's not the only one, but they are unified, they are organized, they are extremely well funded. I don't think I put up the funding sources on the screen, but major institutions, Ford Foundation, Heinz Foundation, name brands you would not expect to be funding this stuff are all major donors to it.
All right. And this last question is just right in my wheelhouse. I love it. Susie wants to talk about the ideological connection. And I talk about this a lot, how we're racializing everything, which you're pointing out. But it's kind of like a Trojan horse, at least in my opinion. I'm not putting this in Susie's words. But that they talk race because people get excited and passionate about it, but then they start talking gender all of a sudden, gender expression, and it becomes, asking teenagers what their sexual preference is and pushing this gender ideology, but they're telling you, no, it's about Black history, it's about true history, we want to talk about slavery, so what's your preferred pronoun? So they want to talk about how much of that you see in the curricula.
One phenomenon we have definitely seen, and that people have pointed out to us, is that the critical race curriculum seems to go hand in hand with the critical gender curriculum. And so we focus on the critical race aspect of it, but the two absolutely seem to go hand in hand from what we've observed.
All right, that's Bill from the Legal Insurrection Foundation. Thanks a lot for your time.
Take care.